What's a secret your family made you keep that still haunts you? When I was 12, my sister Tessa vanished for 3 days. My parents told me to say she was staying with an aunt if anyone asked. We didn't have an aunt. She came back bruised and quiet. When I asked what happened, she said, "Don't ask." Years later, I learned where she'd actually been and why we had to keep lying. It was September. My seventh grade had just begun. Tessa was 16, a high school junior, with a tight little friend group. Our house was usually calm. Dad worked long shifts at a plant, and Mom filled her time with community stuff. Tessa and I weren't very close. The 4-year gap felt bigger. One Wednesday, I noticed her bed was empty, nothing unusual. She often left early to meet friends. But by evening, she still wasn't home. Mom was in the kitchen, whispering into the phone. When she hung up, she told me Tessa was with Aunt Rita in Lakewood for a few days. I said we didn't have an Aunt Rita. Mom gripped the counter and told me to repeat that story word for word to anyone who asked. No questions. Dad came home early. He and Mom argued behind their bedroom door. I couldn't catch the words. When they emerged, Dad looked pale and angry. I asked if Tessa was okay. He said she was, and reminded me to stick to Mom's script. That night, I practiced the lie in the bathroom mirror, trying different tones until it sounded natural. I'd never lied about something serious before. At school the next morning, Tessa's best friend, Bryn, stopped me before first period, eyes swollen from crying. She asked where Tessa was. Her calls weren't going through. I gave her the Aunt Rita line. Bryn stared and said we didn't have an Aunt Rita. I insisted we did, just that she rarely visited. Bryn started crying again. A teacher came over, but Bryn walked away. I stood there, the lie heavy in my stomach. That evening, Mom got a call. Grabbed her keys, told me to stay in, lock up, and ignore the phone. She was gone for hours. Around midnight, I heard a car. Dad helped Tessa out of the passenger seat. She moved slowly, head down. Inside, I saw a dark bruise on her cheek and a split lip. She hugged herself like she was cold, though the house was warm. I rushed to her. What happened? She looked through me. Don't ask. She went straight to our room and shut the door. Mom followed with a pharmacy bag. Dad dropped onto the couch, head in hands. When I tried to ask him anything, he cut me off and repeated the Aunt Rita story. That's all anyone needed. For 3 days, Tessa stayed in our room with the blinds closed, coming out only for the bathroom. Mom delivered meals that returned barely touched. I slept on the couch. Tessa needed space. Sunday night, my parents talked with her in the kitchen. I wasn't allowed in. Afterward, Mom said Tessa would go back to school Monday. If anyone asked about the bruises, I was to say she'd fallen while hiking with Aunt Rita. On Monday, I watched Tessa carefully cover the bruise with makeup. At school, people stared. Bryn approached, eyes wide at Tessa's face. Tessa recited the hiking line and walked off before Bryn could say more. All day, she kept her head down and avoided her friends. Weeks passed, and life looked normal again. No heavy makeup once the bruises faded, but something in her had shifted. No friends over. Straight home after school. She jumped at loud noises. Once, alone together, I asked what really happened. She held my gaze and told me never to ask again. It was better if I didn't know. Months turned into years. Tessa graduated and went to college 2 states away. She rarely came back, even for holidays, and our parents didn't push. The questions faded to the background, but never fully left. I was 18 when pieces of the truth surfaced. Home for winter break after my first college semester, I found a small box of middle school stuff in my closet, my 7th grade diary, with entries about Tessa's disappearance. It brought everything back. That night, I overheard my parents in the kitchen. Mom said she'd seen Oscar's mother at the store. Their family had moved back. Dad asked if she'd said anything about Tessa. Mom said she'd avoided her. Relief flickered across Dad's voice. I froze in the hall. Oscar. The name rang a bell. Later, I flipped through Tessa's old yearbooks and found him. Oscar Reyes, 2 grades ahead. I faintly remembered him as Tessa's boyfriend before she went missing. The next day, I drove to Bryn's. We hadn't talked much since high school, but she was home for the holidays. I asked about Tessa's disappearance. Bryn shifted, said it was long ago. I pressed. Everyone knew there was no aunt, right? She admitted that my parents had made it clear no one should ask questions. I asked if Oscar Reyes was involved. Her eyes widened. She said he was bad news controlling, jealous. Tessa had tried to break up more than once. He always pulled her back. When I asked if he hurt Tessa, Bryn said I needed to hear it from my sister. I called Tessa that night. She sounded surprised. We rarely phoned each other. I told her I needed to know what happened when I was 12. After a long silence, she asked why now. I said I was tired of not knowing, of lying without understanding. She agreed to come home the next weekend to talk face to face. Tessa arrived Friday. Her hair was shorter. She carried herself with new confidence. After our parents went to bed, we sat at the kitchen table with tea. I asked her to tell me everything. She took a breath and started. She had been with Oscar, not by choice at first. They'd broken up the week before, and he didn't take it well. He convinced her to meet and talk. When she showed up, two of his friends were there. They took her phone and forced her into a car, driving to a hunting cabin his family owned outside Lakewood. He said they'd stay until she came to her senses and got back together. The first night she tried to leave, he hit her. That's where the bruises and split lip came from. Why didn't our parents call the police? She said she begged them not to. Oscar's dad was a cop, his uncle a judge. They had pull. Oscar said if she told anyone, either no one would believe her, or worse, they would. And his family would make ours pay. On the third day, his friends went on a beer run. When Oscar fell asleep, Tessa used his phone to call our dad. Dad drove out with his friend Dan, a former boxer, and got her out. It wasn't as simple as a clean rescue. Dad and Oscar's father talked and struck a deal. Oscar would stay away if we didn't press charges or tell anyone. Keeping the Aunt Rita story was part of that. I couldn't believe everyone acted like nothing had happened after a kidnapping and assault. Tessa said that's how small towns work. His family had money and influence. We didn't. It wasn't right, but it was real. She admitted she avoided home because his family still lived there, even after Oscar left for college. Every visit felt like a risk. When I mentioned Mom had said they'd moved back, Tessa clenched her mug. That was why she'd agreed to talk. I needed to know in case I ran into him. She warned me to stay away from Oscar and his family. Was he still a threat? She didn't know, but the move back worried her. Be careful, she said. By morning, she was packed to leave. She claimed she had work, but I could see the real reason being home: reopened wounds. We hugged longer than usual. She apologized that I'd had to lie and carry it so long. After she left, I told our parents Tessa had told me about Oscar and the cabin. They exchanged a look I couldn't read. Mom said they should have told me once I was older. But eventually, silence felt easier. When I asked if they ever planned to tell me, Dad sighed. Probably not. Some secrets become part of a family's foundation. 2 weeks later, at the grocery store, I noticed a man watching me. 30s, dark hair, neat beard. His stare made my skin crawl. As I turned away, he stepped in front of me and asked if I was Monica Tessa's sister. I understood immediately who he was. I tried to pass. He blocked me. He asked how Tessa was and muttered something about her still lying about him. I told him I knew what he'd done. He smiled with dead eyes. He said those 3 days at the cabin were Tessa's idea, and she only invented the other story later. When I said that wasn't true, he smiled wider and told me to ask about letters and calls she supposedly made after, said they had a connection that scared her, and making him the villain was easier than admitting what she wanted. A store employee asked if everything was okay. Oscar stepped back, said we were just catching up with an old friend's family, then told me to say hello to Tessa and that he thought about those 3 days often. That night, I told Tessa. She flatly denied writing or calling him afterward. I said I believed her. I explained he was in town and remembered me from when I was a kid. She said she'd loop in our parents. The next day, Dad called Oscar's father to revisit the agreement. Oscar's father claimed his son was only visiting and would leave soon. Dad warned that if Oscar contacted me again, the deal was off. A week went by quietly. Then I found a small package on my porch addressed to me, a worn spiral notebook like Tessa used in high school. Inside were entries in handwriting that looked almost like hers, describing a totally different version. She'd gone willingly, the bruises were an accident, the kidnapping was a cover story for running away. The last page, in a different hand, read, "The truth has many versions." I knew it was fake convincing, but off. The handwriting wasn't quite hers. Some phrasing sounded wrong. It was bait to make me doubt. I called Tessa. She told me to burn it. This was what Oscar did: bend reality and seed doubt. It's how he controlled her then. Should we go to the police? With what an anonymous, forged notebook he'd deny sending? It would be her word against his again. That night, I burned the notebook in the backyard fire pit, page by page. 2 days later, Oscar's mother called mine. After a short conversation, Mom looked relieved. They were leaving town for good. His father had a job offer in Arizona. Did she believe it? She wanted to, but we'd stay alert. Months passed without contact. The tension slowly lifted. Tessa even came home for Thanksgiving, the first holiday with us in years. Around the table, I noticed she no longer flinched at sudden sounds, and her laugh came easier than I remembered.